He planned every detail, no witnesses, no evidence, no mistakes. But when investigators uncovered a hidden cellar, a destroyed camera, and a truth even darker than murder, the perfect plan began to crumble. This is the chilling story of a killer who thought he was smarter than everyone, until the clues he tried to erase revealed the horrifying twist he never saw coming. Ridgewater had always been known as a place where life moved slowly, untouched by chaos or crime. Families who had lived there for generations trusted one another, and strangers were rare. The streets were quiet after sunset, and the community believed their peaceful routine would never be disturbed. That belief shattered the morning Evan Hale vanished without a trace. His silver truck, usually spotless and neatly parked outside his office, was discovered abandoned near a riverbank miles away. The driver's door was left slightly open, and the keys remained in the ignition, as if someone had stepped out in a hurry. There were no signs of injury, no footprints in the mud, and no evidence that he had walked toward the water. The scene felt staged, almost too clean to be real. Local officers initially suspected an accident, but the lack of tracks made the theory weak. Rumors spread quickly, and the town's comfortable sense of security began to crack. Neighbors whispered about financial trouble, secret enemies, or even the possibility that Evan had run away. Detectives from the county arrived and began a detailed search along the river. Dogs picked up no trail, and drones scanned the area without success. Every new detail only deepened the mystery. People who had always felt safe now locked their doors for the first time in years. Evan's disappearance changed the atmosphere overnight, turning Ridgewater into a town filled with suspicion and fear. Detectives could sense that something was wrong from the start. The scene felt deliberate, as if someone wanted investigators to believe a simple story, one that hid a far more calculated truth waiting beneath the surface. Evan Hale had always appeared to be a man whose life was neatly organized, leaving little room for chaos. To the people of Ridgewater, he represented stability, successful, disciplined, and never careless. However, when investigators entered his home after his disappearance, that polished image immediately began to fall apart. The living room looked normal at first, but subtle signs of neglect became noticeable. Dust-coated surfaces that were usually spotless, and unopened mail was scattered on a table, suggesting he had not been keeping up with his routine. The biggest surprise waited in his office. Drawers that should have held important documents were completely empty, and shelves that once stored business files were bare. His computer, though still functioning, had large gaps in its data. A closer look revealed that multiple files had been deleted only days before he vanished, all purposefully erased rather than corrupted. Detectives also noticed that his home security system had stopped recording 3 days earlier, even though there were no signs of tampering around the exterior of the house. As investigators examined his recent financial activity, the mystery deepened. Evan had been withdrawing cash repeatedly, far more than usual, yet none of it could be traced to purchases or bill payments. Friends recalled seeing changes in him during the weeks leading up to his disappearance. He avoided social gatherings, seemed distracted during conversations, and often appeared tired, as though he were carrying a burden he refused to share. Every detail uncovered pointed to the same unsettling conclusion. Evan had not simply vanished, he had been preparing for something significant. His controlled life had been unraveling long before anyone noticed, and whatever he was planning had pushed him into deeper secrecy than anyone expected. Investigators continued tracing Evan's final movements, hoping to identify the reason behind his sudden disappearance. Their search eventually led them to a quiet mechanic named Dylan Cross, a man who lived on the outskirts of Ridgewater and kept to himself. Phone records revealed dozens of calls and late-night messages exchanged between Evan and Dylan in the months leading up to the incident. The number of contacts increased sharply during the last 2 weeks, suggesting a growing urgency. Detectives were puzzled by the connection, as the two men came from completely different worlds and had no obvious reason to be involved with each other. When investigators arrived at Dylan's workshop, they immediately noticed how unusually spotless it was. Every tool was aligned perfectly, the floor was freshly mopped, and the workbenches were cleared of grease and dust. For a place where engines were repaired daily, the level of cleanliness was unsettling. Chemical residue found in a bucket suggested that bleach had recently been used, raising questions about what had been cleaned and why. Dillon spoke in short, guarded sentences, offering only basic information and insisting that he knew Evan casually. His nervous posture and rigid movements made detectives suspicious, though he didn't say anything that could be used against him. Investigators left the workshop with no solid evidence but a strong sense that Dillon was hiding something. They began digging deeper into his background and learned that he had financial troubles and overdue bills. The sudden bursts of communication between him and Evan now seemed even more significant. Detectives theorized that the two men were connected through something secret and possibly illegal. Although no direct proof linked Dillon to the disappearance, the clues pointed to a relationship far more complicated than either man had admitted, driving investigators to look closer at every detail surrounding their hidden connection. During a deeper digital investigation, detectives uncovered a partially deleted financial file on Evan's laptop. The file was hidden behind layers of encrypted folders, suggesting someone had tried to erase it but did not complete the job. Inside were records of large, unexplained payments sent from Evan to Dillon over several months. The amounts gradually increased, starting with small transfers and ending with significant sums. None of the payments were labeled clearly, and they did not match any legitimate business expenses. Detectives realized these transactions pointed to a secret arrangement between the two men, one that Evan had tried to hide from everyone, including his business partners. Further examination of Evan's financial documents showed signs of trouble. His once successful company had been slowly collapsing. Contracts had fallen through, debts were piling up, and he had been covering losses with personal savings. The pressure had quietly consumed him. Detectives began to suspect that the payments to Dillon were connected to a desperate plan conceived out of financial panic. Evan's search history supported this theory. He had researched insurance policies, staged accidents, and ways to disappear without raising suspicion. Nothing in his digital activity showed signs of an abduction or forced involvement. Instead, everything pointed toward planning. Detectives contacted the insurance company Evan had been dealing with and learned he had recently increased his policy to a suspiciously high amount. This raised the possibility that Evan and Dillon had been working together on a scheme designed to bring in money quickly. However, the payments suddenly stopped 2 weeks before Evan vanished. Detectives believed this abrupt end indicated a falling out or a shift in trust between the two. What had started as a risky agreement now appeared to have turned into something dangerous, hinting at betrayal and hidden motives behind Evan's disappearance. Forensic teams returned to Dillon's workshop with more advanced tools, determined to uncover anything the initial search had missed. This time, they used luminol to detect hidden traces of blood. When the lights went down and the chemical mist settled across the floor, faint glowing patterns appeared. Though not large, the markings were clear enough to show that an injury had occurred inside the building. Samples were collected and later confirmed to match Evan's DNA, shifting the investigation from a disappearance to a likely homicide. Detectives expanded their search to every corner of the workshop. They inspected drains, tool racks, storage shelves, and even the spaces behind machinery. While no major items were found, small scrape marks on the concrete suggested that something heavy had been dragged across the floor. This detail supported the theory that someone had attempted to clean the scene thoroughly, explaining the strong chemical smell noticed earlier. Investigators then moved outside to examine the land behind the workshop. The soil in several areas appeared disturbed, as though someone had recently dug and refilled holes. A forensic team began excavating the most suspicious spot. After hours of careful digging, they uncovered a rusted metal toolbox buried deeper than the surrounding soil. Inside, they found Evan's missing phone, burned, smashed, and bent almost beyond recognition. The damage indicated a deliberate attempt to destroy anything that might contain information. Although the toolbox did not contain a body, the discovery confirmed that someone had taken steps to hide crucial evidence. Combined with the blood inside the workshop, it strengthened the suspicion that Dillon had a direct role in Evan's disappearance. Yet without a body, investigators still lacked the final proof needed to uncover the full truth behind what happened. The discovery of blood inside the workshop and the buried toolbox placed enormous pressure on Dylan, forcing investigators to bring him in for a more intense round of questioning. Faced with mounting evidence, Dylan shifted his approach and offered a new explanation for Evan's disappearance. He claimed that Evan had been the one who initiated a plan to vanish deliberately. According to his statement, Evan was overwhelmed by financial collapse and wanted to escape the responsibilities closing in on him. Dylan insisted that Evan had asked for help staging an accident near the river so he could collect insurance money under a new identity. He framed himself as nothing more than someone who agreed to participate out of sympathy and desperation for extra income. Dylan described a scenario in which Evan left the workshop alive and fled into the night on his own. He said the blood traces were from a minor injury Evan suffered during the staged event and that the destroyed phone had been part of Evan's instructions to sever all ties. His statement was delivered with confidence, almost as if he believed it could redirect suspicion away from him. Yet investigators found major holes in the story. The amount of blood detected did not match a simple accidental injury, and forensic experts questioned why Evan would leave behind anything that could be traced back to him. Despite the inconsistencies, Dylan maintained his version relentlessly. Without a body, the case grew difficult to push forward. Detectives lacked the final piece needed to confirm homicide, leaving them stuck in a gray area between fact and theory. Public frustration increased as weeks passed without resolution. Ridgewater, once peaceful, had turned into a community anxious for closure. Behind the scenes, investigators continued working tirelessly, certain that Dylan's story was a calculated distraction meant to cover a darker truth they had not yet uncovered. A turning point arrived when a tech specialist managed to recover corrupted data from a damaged security camera positioned behind Dylan's workshop. The camera had been broken and partially melted, likely exposed to heat during an attempt to destroy evidence. After hours of digital reconstruction, a short but powerful segment of footage emerged. It showed Evan arriving at the workshop on the night he disappeared, carrying a large suitcase and moving with a sense of urgency. His vehicle lights stayed on, illuminating the back area of the building. Moments later, he walked inside, and the door closed behind him. The footage continued several hours forward, revealing a different scene. Dylan appeared at the same door, dragging a long, heavy object wrapped tightly in a dark tarp. He struggled to lift it, pausing multiple times as if adjusting the weight. The video was grainy, and the lighting made it impossible to determine what was inside the tarp, but the shape and effort involved raised immediate suspicions. Dylan then loaded the wrapped object into the back of his truck, looked around the area repeatedly, and drove away into the darkness. The footage did not show Evan leaving at any point, contradicting Dylan's earlier claim that Evan had walked away unharmed. Detectives viewed the recovered footage as a major breakthrough. Although it did not provide a clear image of Evan's fate, it established that Dylan had moved something large during the critical hours. Combined with the blood evidence and the buried items, the video painted a picture of deliberate actions and concealed activity. Search teams widened their efforts into nearby woods, riverbanks, and abandoned routes, believing that Dylan had transported Evan's body to a remote location. The discovery strengthened the case significantly, turning suspicion into near certainty that Dylan had played a far more dangerous role than he admitted. Investigators continued searching for any place Dylan might have used to hide evidence, widening their efforts beyond the workshop itself. While reviewing old property records, a researcher discovered that the land once belonged to a large farm that included a storm cellar beneath a long-demolished house. The cellar had never been officially filled or removed, leaving the possibility that it still existed beneath the ground. This information immediately caught investigators' attention. If Dylan knew about the cellar, it could have been used to conceal evidence without being easily discovered. A team arrived with ground-penetrating radar to scan the soil around the workshop. After several passes, the radar revealed a large rectangular void buried beneath layers of dirt and discarded metal. Investigators cleared the debris and uncovered a rusted, partially buried metal door. The hinges were stiff, the edges corroded, and the air around it carried a faint musty smell. After forcing it open, a cold draft drifted upward from the darkness below. Inside, the cellar was cramped and damp, with concrete walls stained by years of moisture. Flashlights revealed scattered items on the ground: ropes, worn tarps, and pieces of torn fabric. The arrangement suggested that someone had been restrained inside. In a corner, investigators found a single men's shoe coated in dirt. It matched the pair Evan had been wearing when he disappeared, confirming he had been inside the cellar at some point. Despite the disturbing evidence, there was still no sign of a body. The discovery suggested that Evan had been kept alive for some time before being moved. This new information pushed the investigation into a darker direction, revealing that Dylan had likely taken far more calculated steps than anyone initially imagined. A breakthrough finally came a month after the storm cellar was discovered. A hunter walking through a remote section of forest, miles from both the workshop and the river, stumbled upon human remains partially concealed under fallen branches. Authorities were notified immediately, and investigators rushed to the scene. The body was identified as Evan through dental records, bringing an end to the long search but opening a new layer of mystery. The condition of the remains told a story very different from what detectives had expected. Evan had not died on the night he disappeared. Instead, the medical examiner determined he had been alive for weeks afterward. The autopsy revealed that Evan had been slowly poisoned. Traces of a rare chemical were found in his system, indicating that he had been exposed repeatedly over several days. There were no signs of major physical trauma, no fractures, and no wounds that suggested a violent struggle. His death had been quiet, deliberate, and methodical. Detectives concluded he had been moved multiple times, likely held somewhere hidden before being transported deep into the woods to die. This discovery disproved Dylan's story and pointed to a far more calculated crime. The most shocking twist came when investigators traced the poison. The substance matched chemicals stored in a rented storage unit registered under Evan's name. Records showed Evan had purchased the poison months earlier, in quantities too large to be innocent. This meant Evan had originally planned to use the substance himself, possibly as part of a scheme or betrayal against Dylan. Detectives realized the relationship between the two men had been built on mutual deception, ending in a deadly reversal. The case shifted dramatically. It became clear that the crime had not begun with Dylan's betrayal but with Evan's own hidden intentions, turning the investigation into a story of double-crossing and fatal retaliation. Detectives spent weeks assembling every piece of evidence, reconstructing the events leading to Evan Hale's death. What emerged was a complex chain of plans, lies, and betrayals. Evan, overwhelmed by financial collapse, had created a scheme to escape his failing life. He intended to stage his own death, collect a large insurance payout through a hidden arrangement, and disappear under a new identity. Dylan, facing his own financial struggles, agreed to help in exchange for money. But investigators later learned that Evan had secretly planned to eliminate Dylan afterward. Notes and records showed he had purchased poison long before involving Dylan, intending to remove him once the staged death was complete. Dylan appeared unaware of Evan's intention until he discovered the poison and the documents outlining the plan. Realizing he was being used, he turned against Evan. Evidence showed that Evan was attacked in the workshop and held in the hidden cellar for days. During this time, Dylan used the same poison Evan had intended for him, giving small doses to weaken him without leaving visible injuries. When Evan finally died, Dylan transported the body deep into the forest, believing distance and time would erase all traces. Confident in his planning, Dylan cleaned the workshop, destroyed cameras, burned evidence, and crafted a scene meant to mimic Evan's staged disappearance. For a while, it seemed he had succeeded. But small overlooked details, hidden digital files, chemical traces, and damaged footage, slowly exposed the truth. These fragments, pieced together with persistence, formed a case impossible for Dylan to escape. He was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to life. Ridgewater gradually returned to normal, but the case remained a reminder that even the most carefully crafted crime eventually collapses under the weight of overlooked evidence and undeniable truth.